Over the years, video games have evolved from exercises in basic programming for hobbyists to the creation of entirely new realities by careerists. I find video games to be especially interesting forms of media as they fill so many niches within our society. They create immersion, wonder, and distraction. They tell unique and detailed stories akin to novels. They present some of our most challenging and engaging puzzles, and they even teach us about life itself. As I've said in other videos in this series, video games are an art form that is evolving at a rate perhaps faster than any other in history. What's more, video games have become an eclectic amalgamation, influenced by virtually every aspect of art, literature, and culture. This renaissance in gaming couldn't be happening at a better time for me. After losing my daughter to suicide last year, I began desperately clinging to any little piece of comfort and distraction I could. What's especially awful about trauma and grief is that they rob you of so much more than just the person you lost. They take away a part of yourself and your ability to heal from the loss. They plant a seed in the center of your heart, a seed that grows, outwardly spreading tendrils that intertwine with every facet of your life. I became unable to think, focus, or feel anything other than my hurt. Gaming has sort of been that safe space for me, that old hobby that I could fall back onto and pull myself away from grief, even if only briefly. Though this series was founded on the notion of playing one game and exploring how it made me feel, it's made me realize that this will be an integral part of my healing for the foreseeable future. Many of you have probably connected to me in this project for similar reasons. You have also been through some sort of hardship and seek refuge in the world of gaming. We are connected by this. In this video, I'll share my experience playing GRIS, a game again recommended by many of you in the comments. Seriously, thank you so much to each one of you that takes the time to do this for me. I appreciate you to no end. GRIS could very well be the most appropriate game in this series to date, with its powerful visual representation of the 5 stages of grief. So open your mind and your heart, and let's take a look at this monumental game together. Welcome to Gaming with Grief. I wasn't entirely sure where to even begin this narrative. Every game that I devote the time and energy into playing and creating a video about for this channel moves me in some way, but GRIS is something truly special. There is no dialogue, there's no real story. So much of this game's experience is up to personal interpretation. I know that if I had played this game prior to my daughter's death, it would not have resonated with me nearly as much as it did now. Before I go any further with this video, if you have experienced loss in your life, go play GRIS. I say this to let you know that my interpretation of this game will be my subjective point of view. How I describe my experience with GRIS may not align with yours, or even what the developers intended to convey. Again, this is art we're talking about. That's just how art works. Developed and published by Nomada Studio in 2018, GRIS is a platform adventure game with light exploration and puzzle-solving elements. It's not a difficult game, at least as far as platformers go. There is no time limit, no life meter, no real enemies or environmental hazards that can cause you any harm. It's a very soft, explore at your leisure sort of game, which makes the focus on its environments and themes much more pronounced in my opinion. Though it does not partake in the traditional storytelling you see in many games, GRIS is very much a clear representation of the 5 stages of grief, a model published by Dr. Elizabeth Kübler-Ross in her 1969 book On Death and Dying. The model was developed by her work with terminally ill patients and outlines 5 major emotional stages associated with loss: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. A common misconception about the 5 stages of grief is that they are experienced in this linear order. Those of you that have also been handed great loss know that this isn't true. These major stages can be felt randomly and chaotically, sometimes even in tandem with each other. 13 months after she's gone and I still feel all 5 stages every day. GRIS personifies this theme and divides itself into 5 major sections that roughly align with the 5 stages of grief. You'll see what I mean. If someone walked in the room to find you playing the first few minutes of GRIS, they would likely think you were watching a movie and not playing a video game. We see a freckled, blue-haired girl, clearly weak and distraught, lying on the hand of a giant statue that begins to crumble. She desperately tries to find her voice, gasping for air in a futile attempt to be heard. Her efforts are fruitless, however, and the hand crumbles beneath her. She plummets to the world below, landing in a barren, lifeless land devoid of all color, with only one crudely drawn line separating her from the background. The game's name, GRIS, means gray in a few languages, including Spanish, which is the development team's native language. This opening sequence perfectly conveys why it was given this name. The girl, using every bit of strength she can muster, rises to her feet. She can barely move, pushing forward at a snail's pace and falling frequently. I've tried many times to describe what it's like to go through a traumatic loss, but I've never quite had the words. Your senses are dulled, you are robbed of all your strength and energy, and you struggle just to find the will to keep going. This is how I felt a year ago. I couldn't taste food, I couldn't see color, couldn't understand words as I read them, and barely had the energy to even take a shower. It was as if I had died too, and I was merely existing as an empty husk. GRIS, not using a single written or spoken word, conveys this feeling perfectly, and I mean perfectly. I couldn't believe that someone had finally shown me something that demonstrated what I felt. This is just the beginning. Pressing on, the girl, who I will refer to as GRIS moving forward, eventually regains enough strength to move somewhat normally, though all she can really do is run and jump. As she continues down the path, the environment slowly begins to fill itself with scattered stones, rolling hills, and contorted trees. The game has this brilliant way of zooming in and out when trying to convey the scope of the environment or highlight a puzzle element. I appreciate that we're shown this early on. The wasteland begins to shift its identity as it yields itself to colossal ruins. This colorless, ruinous plain perfectly represents the early stages of loss, especially how it firmly places you in the center of a new reality that you deny is even yours. It's inside one of these ruins that GRIS finds her first of many stars, which follow her on her journey and sort of act as keys. Gathering enough stars will unlock skills and create bridges for her to cross. Besides these stars, there are also mementos, of which there are 28. These collectibles unlock an additional scene near the end of the game, but I'll save that for later in the video. Eventually, GRIS reaches the hand of another large statue, barely holding itself together. Stepping onto its palm, she hovers over it, withdrawing into herself. A soft wave of red dusts the world as strange winged creatures fly in the background. The first stage, denial, is complete. Stepping out into the world now newly washed over in soft ruby hues, GRIS reaches a giant sun-bleached structure, a sort of centralized area of the game that she will return to periodically, each time depositing the stars she's collected. She slides down a seemingly endless maroon hillside, representative of how the descent into anger can consume someone. In this new area, GRIS must fight against raging red sandstorms that will knock her down and push her back, impeding her progress. You'll probably be tired of me saying it by the end of this video, but this game does an incredible job of accurately conveying how the emotions associated with grief and loss truly feel. I've experienced wave after wave of raw, burning anger after Allie's death. I made an entire video about it. Just like these crimson storms, the anger comes on suddenly, violently, and clouds your vision and your judgment. GRIS has but one choice when the maelstrom presents itself. Stop. Endure. Weather it. Trying to run headfirst into anger only pushes you back. This is so true when dealing with grief. Anger can put you on a violent path of self-destruction. It can coerce you into pushing away those that love and support you. Anger will talk you into laying blame in every direction, including at yourself. None of this will help you with your healing. Aside from weathering harsh storms, GRIS must also traverse these towering, rigid, jointed structures, like scaffolding and windmills that remind me of some sort of machinery from the 1800s. These animated environments offer a few new, albeit simple puzzles, forcing GRIS to find ways to activate them and use the various mechanisms to progress. We also get a glimpse of the first life forms that GRIS can interact with, these small, rock-dwelling creatures that are sort of a cross between a spider and a hermit crab. GRIS eventually reaches the hand of another shattered statue. In a cutscene much like the last, we see viridian hues of teal and pine blossom as the world fills itself with twisted vines. The second stage, Anger, is complete. This is as good of a time as any to talk about this game's art. I know I tend to highlight the artwork of every game I play on this channel, perhaps to the point of embellishment, but visual art has always captivated me. I'm not exaggerating when I say that GRIS's artwork is next level. Led by Conrad Rosé, the game's art incorporates many styles: abstract, cubism, minimalism, just to name a few. In interviews about this project, Rosé cited Shadow of the Colossus, Hollow Knight, and Spirited Away as some of his influences, and little pieces of each of them can really be noticed if you pay attention. GRIS, though a simple character at a glance, is shown to be quite detailed in many sequences. Rosé admits to not being an experienced animator, so a lot of the legwork for GRIS's movements was done by an animation team. It's clear that GRIS as a character did not suffer from this, however, and every frame of her many different animations is perfectly crafted. Some of GRIS's abilities allow her to change shape, and the transitions to and from her various forms are seamless. Just as with Spiritfarer's Stella, GRIS is a non-verbal yet incredibly expressive protagonist. Her tremendous loss and the hardships that follow are shown in ways that make you feel them. From those very first moments of her dragging herself forward, the depth of her loss is nearly tangible. As wonderfully animated as our protagonist is, the backgrounds and environments of this game are what really shine for me. Each area of the game, coinciding with a stage of grief, was thoughtfully designed to represent the hardships of facing each stage, paying homage to their uniquely painful identities. Many of the solid background elements are filled with washed out watercolors of various hues instead of being presented as more solid tones. This creates a softness that's important for the game's theme. The monochromatic approach to each area was also an important and, in my opinion, correctly executed creative choice. Giving this much identity to each stage of grief is paramount to making sure that they get the attention they deserve. The empty grays of denial, unforgiving reds of anger, earthly greens of bargaining, somber blues of depression, and hopeful yellows of acceptance are used perfectly to give each biome true uniqueness. Like I said earlier, GRIS is one of those games that doesn't even really look like a video game. It's more like the kind of art house film that would receive acclaim at the Cannes Film Festival. It's a perfect example of what makes video games so great. Each can be visually unique, pushing the medium to new boundaries, making you rethink what a video game is supposed to look like. Any frame of this game could be made into a poster and proudly displayed in any collection. Rosé and the team did a tremendous job bringing this game's world to life, and truly conveying grief and loss in a beautiful, digestible, and respectful way. GRIS moves on to the next stage, bargaining. I wondered how the developers would visually convey bargaining, especially which color choice they would use, and green was a perfect choice. Every stage of grief is cruel in its own way, but I find bargaining to be perhaps the cruelest. It runs in tandem with denial, anger, and depression, all synergistically feeding each other. Whatever you believe in, God, the energy of the universe, karma, you beg and plead for them to give you your person back while in this stage. Sometimes this takes the form of screaming by yourself in the car. Sometimes it's an internal dialogue you have while lying in bed or sitting on the floor of the shower. Regardless, bargaining is a nasty cycle of begging for something you would pay any cost to have, having to realize you can't have it, then eventually begging for it again. Green was the perfect color for this. Aside from representing jealousy, longing for something we can't have, green also represents the gentle yet unforgiving force of Mother Nature, a brilliant parallel to the endless cycle that is bargaining. Continuing with this nature theme, GRIS slides down long, twisted vines until eventually returning to the central ruins area, now covered by an awakened layer of flora. After again returning her collected stars to the sky above, GRIS reaches the forest floor, scattered with dilapidated pillars and bridges. This entire area of the game feels forgotten by time, which is appropriate as bargaining may be the stage of grief that people seem to pay the least attention to. The imagery here had me completely beside myself. You see, part of my trauma therapy has involved mental exercises to help me cope with the paralyzing memory of finding my daughter's body. One of these exercises prompted me to create a safe space in my mind, an imaginary place that I had to produce from scratch. It had to be a space in which I felt comfortable. It had to be a space that I could imagine observing and experiencing with all of my senses. Unprompted, I created a forest with towering trees, a soft floor with a safe path to walk, and a quiet atmosphere. This area of the game so closely matches what I fabricated in my mind months ago that it's almost uncanny. As GRIS continues her journey through the forest, the game starts to slightly increase the complexity of its platforming elements. There are now treetops that GRIS must traverse, changing their shape and rhythmic patterns, not unlike the disappearing block segments in older Mega Man games. Some of the trees even change shape each time GRIS jumps, forcing you to slow down and plan your movements more carefully. She meets a small forest-dwelling creature made of stone. The little guy is untrusting of GRIS at first, hiding any time she comes close. Using her heavy ability to knock apples from the trees, she feeds her new forest buddy until he decides to accompany her. I was happy for GRIS in this moment. Having a friend by your side can go a long way in deep grief, even if you don't talk. After exploring the quiet expanses of the forest and twisting underground root systems with her new friend, GRIS gains her next ability, a double jump/float combination. Aside from the added jump distance, jumping into small clouds of red butterflies allow her to soar upward. This mechanic will be used a lot throughout the rest of the game. Using her new ability to ascend yet another massive structure, GRIS eventually reaches what could be considered the game's first boss, an enormous black bird. The bird flies ahead of GRIS, screaming at her in an attempt to impede her climb. Again, the use of imagery represents this stage of grief perfectly. GRIS goes back and forth between stepping forward and being pushed back, which is exactly how bargaining can feel. A person in this stage ping-pongs between denial and acceptance, sometimes violently, wishing for none of this to be true, for their person to return. They would pay any cost to have their person back, even briefly. I would give any of my earthly possessions for 10 seconds with my daughter, just long enough to hug her and tell her it's okay. She left this world without those things. That in itself adds an extra layer of hurt. GRIS evades the bird enough to make it to a large bell that, once rung, exiles the bird from the tower. She again reaches the hand of another statue, completing the bargaining stage. As a wave of somber blue washes over the world, GRIS returns to the now rain-soaked forest floor. A background symphony of gentle strings accompanies her as she makes her way back to the central ruins and relinquishes her stars. A new area that is now accessible because of the added water invites her into a dark, cavernous area filled with giant mushrooms. GRIS descends into perhaps the scariest and most dangerous of the 5 stages, depression. Once again, I must commend the developers' vision and their representation of this stage of grief. The area starts off quiet and even a bit tranquil. The early stages of depression can feel exactly this way. The melancholy, almost peaceful feeling that takes you over and forces you to slow down and rest can bring some small comfort. This is one of the dangers of depression, however. This comfort can become dark, addictive, and even self-destructive. GRIS finds herself in a frigid area deep underground. As she explores this new biome in search for stars, cold snaps begin bursting across the screen, creating frozen clones of her in place. Just like with anger, sadness can present itself just as swiftly, completely immobilizing you. Aside from the brilliant use of imagery, I found this area to be uniquely interesting. GRIS does not present the player with many challenging puzzles, but this freezing in place mechanic was one that forced me to stop and think for a while. So many video games use some form of ice puzzle, many of which utilize them in creative and challenging ways, but this method was one I hadn't really seen before. I would like to have seen more of it, to be honest. After completing the ice puzzles, GRIS gains the ability to dive underwater. This new skill, much like her flight skill, gives her access to several new areas of the game. she plunges into a deep, maze-like area filled with more puzzles to solve and stars to collect. One of these puzzles has you navigate an underwater edifice that seems impassable at first. Again, the game's use of camera technique to zoom out on this area prompts you to look at the structure above until you realize that the two mirror each other. It's a respectful nod to games like A Link to the Past with its dark and light world puzzles. Collecting the stars in this area activates an immense glowing sea turtle. The turtle guides you deeper into the murky depths, radiating a gentle pinkish light. Though I don't have a theory on this myself, some of the internet believes that this turtle represents the lingering anger that can be a useful means of surviving depression, which I suppose makes sense. Let me know in the comments section what you think about it. GRIS reaches another statue which is in noticeably less disrepair than the others. She releases the final color, summoning an oversized full moon that bathes the world in a gentle golden light. This is the beginning of the end. I'd like to pause and talk about the game's sound. Though GRIS's visual art is perhaps its most attractive feature, it does not stand alone in the spotlight. The game's soundtrack is worthy of equal praise. Composed by the Barcelona-based band Berlinist, GRIS's sound design is a powerful, melancholic arrangement of heavy pianos, complexly layered strings, and choral vocals, all with the intention of lifting both the visual art and the game's theming on grief. The tracks GRIS Part 1 and Part 2 are some of the best examples of this. A lot of the game plays in this sort of destroy and rebuild cycle. GRIS makes progress through one of the stages of grief, is cast into a new stage and falters, then continues forward. The game uses a lot of shorter transitional songs to bolster its visual representation in these sections. The track Komorebi is one of my favorites. It's a quieter, more somber shift that creates a lot of atmosphere with its use of resonance. It almost reminds me of something that you would hear while playing Amori. For those of you that haven't seen some of my other content on this channel, I spend a lot of time wandering around in the woods. Tracks like Komorebi are the perfect sound front in my mind for pushing forward on my journey. I miss my daughter so much. So much that sometimes a song conveys the feeling better than words can. Though GRIS has an irrefutable focus on grief, which is generally a sad experience, not all its music is sad. Tracks like Karasu or Unagi, which plays as GRIS is chased by the eel, are perfect examples of Berlinist's ability to command symphonic music in powerful, suspenseful, and chaotic ways. It evokes a feeling of hopelessness, a feeling of despair as you watch your most precious things slip between your fingers. Grief can feel this way much of the time, like a battle you can't win, which is perhaps true as you don't ever get past grief. It will always be there. Whether it's representing the deep solitude, burning anger, or quiet hopefulness a person can experience on their journey with grief, GRIS's music is the perfect pairing to its visual art. I played through the game twice while making this video, and I made sure to pay more attention to its sound and music when doing so. To those of you who plan to play this game, do yourself a favor and wear a good pair of headphones while doing so. GRIS again tries to find her voice but can barely emit a mere whimper. The statue begins to crumble beneath her as it is consumed in a chaotic, amorphous wave of darkness. The darkness devours GRIS, but she breaks free, bursting from the mass and shooting upward. In what is most certainly the tensest sequence in the game, the mass takes the form of a giant eel that gives chase. GRIS swims for her life, pushing as fast as she can through bleak, corkscrewed tunnels. After nearly being consumed by the eel countless times, she escapes into a quiet area, dimly lit with the glow of bioluminescent beings. This is only to lull you into a false sense of security, as depression can handily do, while it quietly convinces you that you're okay. The eel emerges again, giving one final chase. Just as it looks like GRIS is about to lose this battle, the turtle appears once again, staving off the eel for good and bringing her to safety. GRIS retraces her steps back through the tunnels, swimming up waterfalls until returning to the central ruins. The warm yellows of acceptance have bathed the ruins in moonlight that illuminates new platforms and staircases for GRIS to explore. This area of the game gives GRIS some much-needed respite with its quiet atmosphere and utopian gardens. The starlit cathedrals offer new puzzles in the form of reverse gravity and using light to see the way forward. It's here that GRIS regains what was lost in the opening scene of the game, her voice. Holding down a button prompts her to call out in harmonious, dulcet tones that affect her nearby surroundings. I especially like these giant beetle-like mechanisms that move in tandem with each other. Collecting the game's final stars in this area completes the constellation GRIS has been building since the beginning of her journey. As she approaches it, the black void makes its return, this time taking the form of GRIS's face. It lets out a screeching cry as it consumes the world around it, turning everything white and sending GRIS plummeting. She is swallowed by the darkness. GRIS comes to inside a murky depth, slowly fluttering upward while evading fragments of a statue. She continues to climb the broken pieces until reaching its hand. As she once again sings, the statue reacts to the melodious call, reassembling itself. The void scrambles to consume GRIS as she uses her last bit of strength to sing. Even in acceptance, there will always be darkness. GRIS's efforts were not in vain. The statue, now complete, joins her chorus as the two return the world to its previous state. GRIS embraces the statue's cheek as it sheds a tear. Sorrow, remorse, even pride. It makes me wonder if Allison feels any of these emotions in the afterlife. The statue gently returns GRIS to the roof of the tower. Having fulfilled her journey and accepted her grief, she ascends the starry incline into the ethereal light above. As I said at the beginning of this video, GRIS might be the most appropriate gaming with grief video so far. It's a game that I would recommend to anyone who has suffered a loss, especially a recent loss. Its short playtime, accessibility, and brilliant portrayal of loss give it the potential to be of tremendous help to a griever. I really wish I had found this game sooner. Nearly every minute detail of this game, this work of art, is a charismatic, precisely crafted piece of what can only be described as a masterpiece. As promised, I'll talk about the secret cutscene that's shown as a reward for collecting all 28 mementos throughout the game. We are shown a bright, moonlit sky full of shimmering, shooting stars. As the camera pans down to the ground below, we see two blue-haired girls sitting together in a meadow of lush flowers. The older of the two gently clasps a firefly in her hands, showing it to the younger girl. The firefly dances around her, much like how the stars collected through the game follow GRIS on her journey. The scene fades. This scene, though brief, gives us much more insight into GRIS's journey with grief. It's clear that the person she lost is her mother. This core memory of hers is a beautiful display of their relationship. Love is such a funny thing. When you love a person, and I mean truly love a person, these are the kinds of memories you hold on to. Not memories that involved exciting vacations or expensive gifts. For GRIS, that memory is as simple as sitting on the ground with her mother looking up at the sky. One of my memories is my kids and me running through my backyard during a warm summer downpour. I've never felt so connected to them and this world. Nearly every person who finds themselves in the early stages of grief desperately seeks resources to help them get through that very difficult time. This can be especially hard for people when the loss is traumatic. I had all sorts of people telling me to read this book or join this support group, and I did those things, and they did help to a degree. But the problem that people overlook is just how severely your cognitive abilities are inhibited by this situation. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that I would read a sentence without absorbing a single word. I would stare at the face of a clock, unable to decipher the time. Your brain shuts off its receptors to stimuli in order to protect itself after a traumatic event. This makes the search for viable resources even more difficult. While I read some helpful books and made some meaningful connections with people, you know what possibly helped me the most, at least mentally? Playing Terraria with my son. We spent a couple weeks grinding through the Calamity mod. And while I could only play for a few minutes at a time at first, it's something that was able to distract me from what I'd been through and help jumpstart my brain. Video games have been and will continue to be a safe space for me. Chances are they are for you too. In closing, GRIS is the perfect representation of grief. There isn't a more succinct way to say it. In my What Remains of Edith Finch video, I described that game as an interactive short story. I would describe GRIS as an interactive piece of visual art using that same analysis. GRIS is a great game for anyone who has suffered great loss, anyone who wants to better understand grief, or anyone who simply loves visual art. Team Nomada, thank you for gifting the world of grievers with this masterpiece. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps me spread the message and doesn't cost you anything to click that bell. If there are other games you think I should play for this series, leave a comment below and let me know. I appreciate each and every one of you to no end. Please take care and remember to love yourself.